Hello, I am Blaze, and welcome back to Warframe, and nearing the finishing line on those new Syndicate melee weapons that were made available a little while ago. For number 5, I'll cover the Vaykor Sydon. To acquire the Vaykor Sydon yourself, you'll need to either achieve the rank of General with the Steel Meridian and then purchase the weapon for 125,000 standing, or head over to Warframe's trading community to buy it from another player. In either case, as usual, you will need to be at Mastery rank 8 and you will need to provide your own catalyst and weapon slot if you want those installed on it. Now, I covered the base Sydon a while back as well, so if you want most of my opinions on polearms in general, you can go ahead and watch that video to provide a little context for some of the things I'll be saying in this video. It's okay, this video will still be here when you're done. Okay, you should at this point know that I'm not a fan of polearms in general, but the Vaykor Sydon deserves as much of a look as the other Syndicate melee weapons, so here we go. The Vaykor Sydon gets a reasonable boost to a lot of its stats for being a Syndicate version. This includes having its base damage increased to 85.1, spread between 80.8 puncture and 4.3 impact damage, with no slash component. It also gets a boost to its attack speed, bringing it up to a 1.08 attack speed modifier, and gets an increase to its critical chance up to 15%, maintaining its 2x critical damage modifier. So the Vaykor Sydon is a polearm that will be able to work with the Body Count Blood Rush Berserker combo to ramp up its critical stats. Aside from that, it keeps its 25% status chance. Not bad, but diluted somewhat by the two physical damage types. It also inherits the weapon class's benefit of having wide-reaching slam attacks, affecting a 10-meter radius around the point of impact, which is huge. The Vaykor Sydon also gets an added V polarity in its mod slots, which is quite useful for a number of different mods, and it has a scratch polarity in its stance slot, matching the Shimmering Blight stance. Sadly, I find this to be the worst of the two polearm stances we currently have, though that isn't really saying much, as neither of the polearm stances are much good. Its stats are perfectly reasonable, so let's move along to its added Syndicate ability. Like the Secure Electa, the Vaykor Sydon only has one added ability, but unlike the Secure Electa, this one is actually pretty creative. The Vaykor Sydon will charge up a Radial Blind when you use it to parry attacks. This is an all or nothing affair. You must build its charge up to 15 parried attacks before you release your block to send out the Radial Blind, or it won't do anything. But this is quite interesting and sort of fits with the Steel Meridian's theme in a way, blinding your enemies with the light of justice. It essentially works in exactly the same way as Excalibur's Radial Blind ability. Affected enemies will stand frozen in place and will be open to finisher attacks for the duration. So the idea is probably to block incoming fire, incapacitate your enemies with the blind, and then use that window to retaliate. The blind defaults to a 15-meter radius and lasts for 5 seconds. Not especially great on its own, but the blind radius is affected by reach and primed reach, which will make the blind area much more impressive, and works well for the weapon itself too. Polearms, while certainly not featuring quite the long range of whips or those tactical nuclear devices wielded as tonfas, it's still one of the longest reaching weapon classes, so primed reach will be useful even outside of the blind effect. A fairly good way to make use of this is to roll or jump after you charge the ability. This will allow you to keep moving fairly fluidly while the blind is sent out without having to worry about the animation where your Warframe raises the trident up first. So if you would like to use the Vaykor Sydon, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Unfortunately, the 5-second duration on the blind goes by quickly, and you cannot increase it in any way to my knowledge. Which is quite infuriating, as this is the one time where Lasting Sting might have actually seen some use, but it is simply not to be. And that's not the only problem with the ability, I'm afraid. In fact, due to how the effect is triggered and how combat in Warframe tends to flow, the Vaykor Sydon's abilities come across as being quite half-baked. See, the thing about parrying with your melee weapon is that it's kind of the second worst melee mechanic in the game. I'll get to the worst melee mechanic in the game later, at least in my opinion, but for now let's just focus on the Vaykor Sydon. Blocking will at best reduce the damage you take from any individual attack by 85%, depending on the weapon class. The other two damage reduction tiers are 60% and 35%. Thankfully, the polearms are in the 85% category, so their parries are the least worthless, but they are still bad, and here's why. Number 1. Parrying is usually quite slow. It's often much more effective to just chop your enemies into little bits than it is to screw around with holding your block button with your melee weapon out and hoping the enemies decide to shoot you in a timely manner. Number 2. The damage reduction still isn't good enough. It can stack up with a few things and isn't so bad with Saren's Toxic Lash, for example, but generally the formula will go like this. Either the enemy will not do a significant amount of damage to you and blocking will be a waste of time because you're not going to mitigate that much damage anyway, or an enemy will be able to do this to you, and blocking is going to be working to mitigate a shitload of damage, which will still be a shitload of damage after the parry does its job. Number 3. While you can channel while blocking to bring the damage reduction up to 100%, doing so against enemies that can hit you rapidly will result in you completely tanking your entire energy reserve, which would have been better used just using one of your abilities to incapacitate the enemies in some way, rather than waiting for the Vaykor Sydon's blind effect to charge up. Conceivably, this could have been a good way to open with a radial blind after aim gliding into a group of enemies, but the problem with that is, enemies are made to have greatly reduced accuracy while you're in the air, which is why staying mobile is so useful. But it also means that you can't really open with the Vaykor Sydon's radial blind in that way. And for some Warframes that have abilities that can tank damage for you, like Iron Skin or Warding Halo, you can apparently hold the parry button to reduce the damage your extra health bar takes, but it will not actually charge up the blind because it won't actually play any of the parry animations. And for that matter, maybe I just don't get polearms in Warframe, so maybe someone could enlighten me if I'm wrong, but I wonder, who specifically equips a polearm? I don't mean just bringing it along as your melee weapon, that I can get. I mean actually going into your dedicated melee mode with a polearm. The stances are terrible. You have a choice between 2 stances with 1 combo each, neither of which are especially good. Or you could go without a stance to actually get a thrust moveset on the Sydon, which, due to not having a stance, is extremely limited. And on top of that, the thrust moves are actually quite slow and the hit areas are awkward to work with. But when you just use it for quick melee, you get a pretty fast spinning move with multiple hits and decent range. Which means you'll probably never actually equip the thing. Which means you can't parry with it because parrying requires going into your dedicated melee mode. Which means that the Vaykor Sydon will never charge up its damn blind in the first place. The entire point of the Vaykor Sydon is handily thwarted because of the weapon class it belongs to right now, and that's really just sad. As far as I'm concerned, the Vaykor Sydon's unique selling point will not actually see any use unless you're basically just screwing around. It also makes me wonder why they chose the Sydon, a relatively recent weapon, for the Syndicate treatment, when there are so many other melee weapons that could have used the buff treatment that would actually work so much better with the Syndicate effect. Imagine how awesome a Vaykor Sylva and Aegis could be. I mean, I know the Sylva and Aegis are technically Tenno origin weapons, but still, it's needed some love for a very long time. Final Harbinger is a good stance that is now actually much easier to get from the Freyarch Spectre, and it's a frickin' flaming sword and shield. The Sydon didn't need a direct buff. It and every other polearm just needs a decent stance and they'd be good. But unfortunately I feel like Digital Extremes kind of missed the mark on this one big time. For mods, I basically just have the usual critical melee weapon build. Body Count, Blood Rush, and Berserker to take advantage of the combo multiplier and critical hits. Primed Reach for more range. Life Strike because being able to heal yourself without a Trinity being around is very useful. And an element combo of your choice. Though again, if you don't care about Life Strike or you are a Warframe that can heal itself reliably, or if you're just going to be using it for quick melee anyway, then swapping out Life Strike for Maiming Strike, if you have it, provides pretty strong results. With the Maiming Strike build, I didn't really have any issues getting the Vaykor Sydon to kill things reliably until I was beyond the 40-minute mark in the Mott survival mission, and that's reasonably impressive. Some credit can be given to the Vaykor Sydon. While its ability is half-baked and far too awkward to use to be worth it at all, the weapon itself is actually not too bad. Having a 15% critical hit chance means that Body Count and Blood Rush worked very well on it. However, I will give a word of warning on the Vaykor Sydon, as it seems like yet another issue with the fact that it's a polearm. If you stack up Berserker to its maximum and then add some more attack speed on top of that, like Warcry, it kind of breaks things. The animations become very awkward and cancel themselves out much more frequently than I would like. I'm not really sure what's going on here. Another point of potential use is in the case that you have a Warframe that relies on quick thinking as a safety net. While holding the block animation, your Warframe seems to be not susceptible to the stupid stagger thing that quick thinking can do, so that is a potential avenue to make use of the radial blind. but that's still far from ideal. After all, quick thinking still means you're draining your energy, potentially in extremely large chunks if you're blocking something like high-level bombard missiles. Which goes back to the same problem that using a channeling block to completely mitigate damage against rapid hits has. Wave goodbye to that energy pool you probably should have used to just incapacitate your enemies in the first place. If you've been waiting for a more crit-focused polearm, then maybe you will still find use out of the Vaykor Sydon. It has the highest critical chance of all the polearms, along with being the second fastest of the polearms at its baseline behind the Orthos Prime, and having the second highest base damage of all the polearms, second to the Legion's 100 base damage. But I personally find the polearm movesets to be very weak and generally leave me wanting, and its actual unique selling point doesn't mesh with the rest of it in any way, shape or form. So I don't care much for it at all, which is a shame because, again, the radial blind ability is a cool idea. Thank you for watching my look at the Vaykor Sydon. All comments are appreciated, and I hope to see you around next time. For other Syndicate melee weapons, feel free to take a click over to my videos on the Telos Boltus, Racta Dark Dagger, or Sancti Magistar. And as always, good luck, have fun, and take care.